Now, I said that I presented kind of a meta-analysis for the OECD countries, but there is variation, as I told you, within OECD countries. When you do the analysis within each country, you get for some countries an effect of 6, 7, 8, and for other countries you get an effect of 2, 3. We want to understand what's behind those differences within the OECD countries. That could shed light on the differences between OECD and developing countries. But before that, I want to show you just one table from an analysis I did in Israel with primary school kids, okay, using first the same approach that I used here for the PISA data, within pupil analysis. This is a sample of 11 and 12 years old at 5th grade in Israel. Okay? Now remember, we found about 6 points given the standard deviation of 100, that's 0.06. Okay? That's for 15 years old in the OECD sample. 0.06 standard deviation. In Israel, when you put all 3 subjects together, you get 0.071. When you put science and English, you get 5.8. Math and English, 8.2, 0.082, and math and science, 0.087. This is already in terms of standard deviations. So the PISA is 0.06, this is 0.07. Okay? Primary school kids, 5th graders in Israel, national testing, similar to the plan you have in mind to do in Spain. National standardized testing, 0.071. Now, then I have in that paper an estimation with the natural experiment of changing the funding formula. I got exactly the same number, 0.065. Okay? So completely different identification strategy on the same test scores, and I got a similar result. So this is kind of supporting, in a way, the results that I find for the OECD. Okay? It's just backing it a little bit. Okay. Moving to the last part of the paper, as I said, I wanted to see what explains the variation in test scores within the OECD sample. Why? Okay? I take you back to the original stylized facts that Finland, who is #1 in PISA, is among the lowest in terms of time inputs. How does it sit? How does it fit the results that I have shown you that hours of instructions are important input in the education production function? So Finland may have fewer hours of instruction, but the nature of the education system, the fundamentals of the education system, the structural features of the education system in Finland may be such that the productivity of the fewer hours that they are teaching is compensating for the gap in hours, and that's why they are way up in the test scores. So what are the features that I find using data from PISA that can explain variation across countries in marginal productivity of hours of instruction? Again, PISA is a fantastic source of information in terms of cross-section data. Unfortunately, it's hard to use it for a causal inference. This is one way to do it, the way I do it, within pupil analysis. I wish that the PISA data would have been revealed to researchers with geographical location, with school location, because one thing that I find very feasible for doing analysis in education is to merge data set, to bring in auxiliary data, okay? Because we know that some of the regions of Spain have done some things differently from others, okay? And those could have been between PISA rounds, okay? If you can combine the information on reforms done in some of the regions of Spain, which were different in terms of timing across the regions in Spain, you can actually do some analysis, differences in differences, regression discontinuity. So really important to bring in data set to merge into the PISA data. So that's just a remark, kind of a footnote on what can be done with the PISA, because the PISA has a lot of rich information. So what part of it is they have questions to the school principal. There is a school principal questionnaire, not only a teacher questionnaire, a school principal questionnaire. And the school principal tells about accountability measures that were adopted in school. For example, does the school publicize on its website the test scores of the school? This is something that could vary by schools. Does the school use achievements of students to determine the salary of the school principal? Does the school use students' performance to determine teacher salaries? Okay? All these are accountability measures. And then there are questions about the autonomy in hiring teachers and determining their wages. Okay? There are questions whether the school has a governing board. What's the role of the governing board? All that is in terms of accountability, in terms of management. Okay? And there are questions about using the budget. Does the school have a different budget, a bank account? Can it use the budget to move around items and spend it more on one thing at the expense of other things? So that's autonomy in using the budget. Okay? And then there's a school, as I said, governing board that actually overlook the budget and staffing of the school. So all these elements I found to be positively correlated with the marginal productivity of teachers' instruction time in different subjects. Okay? The way I do it is I use the same estimation framework I had before, but now I have an interaction term between instruction time and each of these features, which are introduced as dummy variables or indices. The nice thing about PISA is that it produces for you indices. An index for the accountability in the school, an index measure for the autonomy in staffing, an index in terms of using the budget, an index in terms of the quality of other inputs. Okay? So I don't have to prepare or cook those numbers. A PISA framework prepare those numbers for us. Okay? So I use them. So when I do this, these are the important things that come up as factors that affect the marginal productivity of time. What doesn't affect the marginal productivity? School autonomy in teaching methods in pedagogy. Okay? The quality of inputs such as computers and other school facilities. There's a whole range, and the PISA compute an index of this. It is positive, to be honest, the effect, but it's not highly precisely measured. And whether the board influenced curriculum and evaluation methods. That's also not something that I find affecting the differences across countries in marginal productivity of hours of instruction. These are not. Okay? So I won't go into the detail of the estimation. I will go back here and tell you what can we take from these two for policy. So first of all, instruction time is important. Okay? Maybe small and not large as one would have expected, but at the margin that we have, it turned out that it is important. Okay? So one thing to do is, given all these characteristics, you can increase the amount of time kids study math or science or English. So in Israel, for example, there was a new minister of education about 4 years ago, and he wanted to improve the PISA test scores. That was his agenda. Okay, you may agree with that, you may disagree with that, but he said, we will improve the PISA test scores. So he increased hours of study in the subjects that the PISA is testing. Okay, in all the 3 subjects, mostly science and math. Okay, and Israel improved actually in the 2009. They have already some information about the 2012. Israel improved a bit in those subjects. So I think this is a real policy issue that one can examine and consider, not only regarding the PISA testing, but in general, the human capital formation. Now, people sometimes are against testing. They are against testing because they think that it will lead to strategic behaviors of schools, to cheating, to a focus on certain pieces of material, and the claim is that this does not, improvements in these test scores does not imply human capital acquisition for the long term. Okay? Well, there might be something in that. Okay? I can tell you that I have done a study where I gave incentives to teachers as a group, one paper, as individuals in another paper. In both papers I found that it increased test scores in all the subjects that were part of the incentive schemes. I now have a forthcoming paper where I follow these kids and teachers 12 to 15 years later. They are adults now. They are 35 years old now. So I look at their wages, at their employment, and on their completed schooling, university schooling. This was high school intervention on university schooling. So I find no evidence that there was teaching to the test that had no meaningful gains in terms of long-term human capital and lifetime outcomes. Because I see real gain in educations as completed schooling. I see real gain in employment and real gains in wages, both for boys and girls. Okay? Now there are men and women. Okay? Yeah, so I don't see gains in terms of, I see a little bit of gain in age of marriage, delayed marriage by about a third of a year, no effect on fertility, okay, no effect on disability and welfare payments. But on the major items in terms of labor market outcomes, I do see gains. So Israel may be a special context where this mechanism of incentivizing teachers was forcing them to produce real human capital gains, but I wouldn't actually put aside the possibility that test score gains in standardized testing will reflect real long-term human capital formation. So beyond manipulating the hours of instructions in schools, one can think about these things. Okay? Now, I want to be careful. This is not as causally interpreted as the evidence on hours of instructions. It's correlations. There is a school fixed effect in the exercise, but I wouldn't, say that this is 100% safe proof in terms of identification. Yet I think it's really suggestive that, and it's in line with what we know from other studies, that accountability is important, that autonomy is important, that the autonomy of the school principal in hiring teachers, in determining their wages. All these things were found in other studies. Here we find them in one study together when I use this simultaneously in the estimation, not only one by one, but simultaneously. While other things, these things are less important. And if I would be the advisor to the Minister of Education, and he doesn't want to go and do some experiments for a year or two before we do a big reform in Spain, he said, I want to do a reform now. Who knows if I will be in power after the next election? I want to leave my remark now. I don't want to do experiments. Tell me what to do. Okay? If I was his advisor, I would go with these recommendations. Okay? I mean, if this is the area where he wants to focus, okay, I would put my money here. Okay? I will tell him and convince him as much as I can, let's do some experiments for a year or two and make sure that we get the right answers. But if he's stubborn and he says, no, let's do it now, I will pick this over this. Okay? So basically, this is my conclusions for the paper. Thank you.